Morning, everybody. In this month of Tammuz, a tough month for the Jewish people, but maybe it'll change this year, especially when we're studying together about David Hamelech, Mashiach's great-great-grandfather, and it wasn't too long ago that we had Rus, on which we have the absolute international expert on Rus, our Rabbi Weisblum, the Bubby, the Safta, whatever you want to call her, of Mashiach. So David Hamelech always gives hope. We are in Perek Tezayin in the 16th chapter of Shmuel Aleph, and we are up to verse 12, where Shmuel Hanavi, after having meeting all David's brothers, and it's always meaningful in this shul when you keep saying David's brothers, because we have so many nice people named David around here, and maybe the Davids will take it to heart that Hashem is going to tell Shmuel. I just think about this David's in the crowd. If there's any Davids talking to a Sam, saying, well, all David's brothers are nice guys, but they're nothing compared to David. Nobody's like David. So Shmuel Hanavi is introduced to David, and absolutely it's a surprise. So the exact words of the pasuk, in English it would be 16:12 in Shmuel Aleph. So David Hamelech is requested. He's not there. He's running with the sheep someplace. Vayishlach, and he sent. That's Yishai, David Hamelech's father. Vayivi'eu, and David was brought. Vahu Admoni, and he was a red one. As they say in the other side of the world, he was a gingy. In Yefei Einayim, he had pretty eyes. Nice eyes, Vitov Roi, and he was quite nice to look at. Vayomer Hashem, so he's looking at him, and Shmuel's thinking, this is going to be the leader of the Jewish people from the tribe of Yehuda. This is what it was all been leading up to. It's not those brothers that seem to fill the bill much better. It is this David, the shepherd, and Hashem says, come, get up. Rise up, Shmuel Hanavi, Mishachehu, anoint him, Kizehu, because this is he. And it's almost a little dramatic over here. Shmuel had looked over all the brothers, and the brothers looked so much the part. They looked like he thought a king should look, and he thought he had the reputation straight, and this young man comes in, and Hashem says, guess what? This is him. And, Shmuel started thinking, my Lord, well, God, if you say so. Now, I just want to add, there are some sources that say Moshe Rabbeinu didn't exactly look the part either. There's a lot of discussion about it. Now, this is a piece of archaeology. If we could get our hands on it, and if you really look into it, there are those who try to. It would be very hard to authenticate. I don't want to put too much in it because they really argue about it, but there was supposed to be some non-Jewish king way, 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 way back that was supposed to send somebody to paint a picture, an image of Moshe Rabbeinu. People argue about it. It's not sitting in the Louvre. I don't know what happened to it. But all I know is whoever goes with this line, they all say, when the image came back, the king said, you got to be kidding. This is the holy man that went up to heaven with a face like that. Metazapunim. Can't be it. So people tumble all about it. It's a very hard thing to verify. If you find the articles, it wouldn't be easy to authenticate, but you never know. But according to those who go with that, Moshe didn't exactly look the part either. So that means whatever version of the Ten Commandments you enjoy, whether it's the silent version, the Charlton Heston version, the Burt Lancaster version, your kids' version, whatever it is, sometimes the great Jewish heroes and heroines you might not be so impressed with. But it's the inside, not the outside, right?
Yeah.
Because, you are the best example, Steve Leibowitz, because you're a professional and you know that sometimes you can go to a restaurant or a caterer and they'll serve you something fancy and appealing. When you bite into it, it's not. But you don't do that because you're an honest Jewish caterer with Ashkacha, right? But you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's all
especially by cream cakes.
Not about the way it tastes.
Right. So by Jewish
Looks
people,
pretty.
good leaders. Another example. This is very funny. I believe it was Rabbi Yecheskel Sarna, who was head of the Chevron Yeshiva. Somebody went to him once and said, "Who do you think was the greatest rabbi that had the greatest effect on the Jewish people for the past?" I don't know what he said then. The past 100+ years. Who do you think was the greatest rabbi, the greatest Jewish leader? He says the greatest Jewish leader was a woman. What? I asked you who was the greatest rabbinical leader that had the greatest influence on the Jewish people. He goes, I heard what you said. The greatest one was a woman. And he said it was Sarah Schneera. Sarah Schneera is you probably heard her. She was a seamstress from Krakow, a tiny, tiny little woman. She was married. Never was able to have children, but she is the one that rescued women's education. That's a whole separate discussion, but at her time in Poland, in a nutshell, and this you read this all over the place, you had fathers going to shul with their sons and learning and davening and Simi's Maris, wearing the whole getup, if you're into that, and the father would be downstairs singing Zmiris with his son, and the daughter would be upstairs doing her Polish literature homework on Shabbos. So Sarah Schneera found out that this was a very rampant thing, and she said, hey, the women are the foundation of the Jewish people. Yeah, we can't have this. And she is the one that pretty much single-handedly, a few people helped her along the way, especially Rebbitzin Judith Grunfeld from England, one of her number one students, but really she was mostly a one-woman show. She had some help along the way. So I'm just saying how people would think, that's the heroine that saved the Jewish people? Yeah, and a lot of people agree with Rabbi Sarna's estimate and assessment that it was her. And if you see a picture of her, so you probably would think that, Sarah Schneera, blessed memory, looked like Rebbitzin Jungreis. You ever see a picture of Rebbitzin Jungreis? She wrote a whole lot of books. She has like a shade that was toward the Empire State Building, and very, very attractive, powerful woman, speaker, dynamic, and she does a lot of great things. So you would think Sarah Schneera looked like her. But if you would, it's very easy to find a picture of Frau Schneer. You just go on Google Images and, put Sarah Schneera is her name. And she was this tiny little lady, nothing dynamic about her, quietly moved mountains. So the matter story, now listen, we're not beating down on handsome, dynamic, exciting people, but Mr. Sliam is thinking, I know. I'm getting a message from David Sliam, presidential message. Obama tried to send me some, but your president is holier. So anyway, sorry, President. This one is holier. So anyway, Mr. Sliam says, Karp, don't forget that we just learned in Daf Yomi of the rabbi who was a big shot and came back from yeshiva, thought he knew everything, and he encountered a fellow that didn't have a very pleasant face, and the rabbi made a wisecrack, got in a lot of trouble for it, and the rabbi was set straight that, you could be handsome and learned, but if you weren't so handsome, you wouldn't be so vain, and you'd be even more learned. And then the Gemara ended up that the rabbi wound up apologizing him. Isn't that what you were trying to tell me?
Absolutely. See
how powerful, see what marriage has done for you? You can send telepathic messages. Leonard Nimoy ain't got nothing on you.
Except all your sensibilities.
Except he's a kite. Well, anyway, so let's get to David Hamelech. And really, the fact that David Hamelech is not what he looks like is going to help us with everything. Because a lot of things with David Hamelech may not be what they seem. And to be honest, some things he does that look bad may not be as bad. And to be honest, some things he does that look good may not be quite as good. You have to remember, at the end of the day, he is human. Just a quick aside about that. There are some synagogues, if you make that statement, Moses is human, David is human, whatever it is, some people will kill you. I've seen it, I've been exposed to it, my wife's was exposed to it. These people get really, really, really out of shape. Bruce says, I don't buy it. So you just need to know there's a Mishnah in the Darim where basically two Tanoim have an argument how to look at the greatest of the great, which is really going to cast an umbrella over everything. You all remember in Chumash, Moshe Rabbeinu was late giving a bris to one of his sons, okay? He was attacked by some kind of creature. His wife saves him, either doing the brit herself or having someone else do the brit, Gemara Avodah Zarah, something like that. But there's a Mishnah in the Darim where one rabbi comes right out, and you can't whitewash it. You can't. It's there. In whatever version you want, one rabbi says, the great Moses, who already had seen the burning bush and was on his way back to Egypt to save everybody, he was a little lazy, that's all. He was a little tardy. He should have done that bris faster. And there's all kinds of answers that he couldn't do it right away because he cut a deal with his father-in-law. He was in the desert. Whatever you want. But there is still one rabbi in the Mishnah, black on white, that says Moshe was very, very great, but that time he was a little lazy. That's all. He was a little lazy, and that's what it was. The other rabbi says, oh, no, you can't talk like that. Oh, no, you can't speak of the great Moses like that. And he gives his explanation. So so as long as we're in a certain amount of respectfulness, there are times where you may want to say, you can't say that about David. Twist your brain inside out till you figure it out. Or you could say, all right, pretty good fellow, but maybe that time, flesh and blood. But I just need you to know those two pathways, that's in a Mishnah, all right? And your mind may change a few times, more this way, more that way, but I'm just saying the Mishnah does say that, so people should try not to be offended. It is there.
Isn't there a restriction, though, on who can make those kinds of comments about people like Moshe Rabbeinu and David Hamelech? Don't they have to have a certain amount of learning to be able to say something like that? I'm
just saying the Mishnah Darim just says two different categories, and then where to go from there is going to take a lot of work. The best thing I could tell somebody is just learn and study as much as you can of everything, and then you'll be able to make an educated. We all going to make educated guess last decision until they come and shake hands with us in person. So just try to gather in everything you can. You try to make the call. You have the same thing with later history. You have people who didn't really live that long ago, and we have some of the same issues. Trying to figure them out. People who really weren't that long ago. I know there are people who are writing books that trying to figure out if Roosevelt was good for the Jews or bad for the Jews. But that's a little easier, a little bit closer to our time. What was this one thinking? What was that one thinking? You just try to gather in all the information you can and try to call the shot. But let's see what we have about David Hamelech over here. All right. So the pasuk says he was brought before him Admoni. He's a ginger, he's a red one, and he does have nice eyes, and he is good to look at, and this is going to be the big scholarly of the Jewish people. So the first one to run in is the Yalkut Mamloes. He wants to help us with trying to understand what was going on over there. Now, in Judaism, don't be nervous if there's people with red hair in your family. I have plenty of people with red hair in my family. But sometimes people get a little bit scared of people with red hair. And the Gemara does say that sometimes, if you're a very red kind of a person, you can be rough and tough, and that could be good or bad or something in the middle. So right away, the Ma'amloyes comments on that statement, he's a red one. Now you have to remember, who is the first one we think of when you hear he's a red one? Esav. Now that doesn't make Esav all bad either. That's another whole discussion, what to do with Esav's being Mr. Red One. We know historically it didn't turn out too well. But he couldn't have been all evil like some of his grandchildren, because Hamelech is his grandchild, because you have to remember, Yaakov Avinu was faulted for not letting Dinah marry her uncle. Whether that makes sense to us or not, that's clear. Nobody argues that somehow, some way, Esav was supposed to be allowed a shot to go out with Dinah, and somehow she was supposed to set him straight. That is one of the hardest things to understand in the whole Torah. But obviously the man couldn't have been totally evil. Must have been some hope over there. So let's see what the Mamloya says. What's with this red business? So Mamloya is building on Chazal about people being born with a certain amount of luck. I'm not going to get into is mazal, is the correct translation of mazal luck? That's a whopper. Bruce says no. And is luck the way the cookie crumbles? Is the stars or this or that? You can fight about that all day. But whatever it is, we are all born with a certain set of challenges, malot v'chasronos, ups and downs. That's the way it is. If God is involved this much, that much, chromosome, roll the dice, whatever opinion you want to take about that. There is the Ramban. The Ramban says, don't blame everything that annoys you on God. Half of it is your own fault, and half of it is just mazal, whatever that means. Now, is there another, celestial plane, a giant wheel in the sky, like the rock song says, that somehow mazal locks into? Whatever. You can read a few books, you'll find all about that. But whatever it is, David is born with the red quality, which does denote a certain toughness. So says the Mamloy is building on that. David Hamelech was someone who, in general, nothing is always. I used to say always. And my wife gets so upset. Did you find that? You cannot say the word always to women.
So, other way around.
What do you mean?
She says always, and I say no.
The first half of my marriage, I was able to say always. And then I learned at a certain point, if you say always, that's it, you're doomed. So don't say always to women. It could be dangerous. Steve, it's not that bad, but be careful.
But it's okay for them to say always.
They can do anything they want.
Them to say whatever they want.
All right. Especially for you, you're Shana Rishayna. All right. So says the Mamloy is, David Hamelech's attitude in general was, I'll be careful not to say always, that when it came to dealing with enemies, then he used his redness. When it came to dealing with Klal Yisrael, he tried more to use his beautiful eyes and his pleasant countenance. Now that's a hard thing. But they said every person is born with different qualities, and what had to be learned about David Hamelech, and I imagine he had to learn about himself also, is the redness, the gruffness, the toughness that he has to know to use that pretty much for his enemies. And he does have a few Jewish enemies. Mostly not. Goliath, all those guys. But the part of his being that's more the pleasant eyes and the good-looking countenance, that he's got to try to shift that more towards his friends and everybody else. Not an easy thing to do. Anyone in their life, whoever has had to discipline anybody, whether it's a family member, whether it's someone that works with you, it's not easy to turn it on and off. One day your kid gets a crummy report card, the next day they do something else, and then it could be, that maybe you have 5 employees, and it could be at 1 o'clock you want to praise this employee, and at 1:10 you got another employee you want to rake over the coals. So turning yourself off and on, you have to do it, and you got to do it right. But David Hamelech, that was supposed to be one of his qualities, how to turn it off and on, and how to use his redness. Not an easy thing. They say, the year before I went to Ner Israel, there was a tremendous person there named Rabbi David Kronglass, a Yid Tzaddik. He is from the famous Mir Yeshiva that ran from the Nazis, and they escaped. There's a lot of great books on it. He was in Shanghai, and he really puts us to shame. The other day I went to teach in the community college where the rabbi's friend, Rabbi Lancaster, is the dean over there. In the parking lot, I drove a bright white car on a bright white parking lot, and I'm walking up the steps and it was 92. I walked into the kollel, and right away you get the cool air. I was studying with Rabbi Spiro's son. He helps us with our Sefer Torah sometimes. So Aviezer's spiral grandfather, he had also studied in the Mir in Shanghai with Rabbi Kronglass. What killed me was in the Mir, and this is a fact, there are still a few people around who remember, instead of going from the hot to the cool to learn, Aviezer's grandfather and Rabbi Kronglass, for them it was 92 in a Beis Medrash, because they were in Shanghai. No air conditioning. I don't know if they had fans. It's a known thing that they were allowed at a certain point just to sit there in the undershirt and the tzitzit. This is a documented thing. There are a few of them still around. So I just felt like such a wimp. I can't wait to get out of the 92, maybe 94 parking lot, 92 degrees, getting the cool 68 degrees deluxe kollel, and I'm learning with a kid that his grandfather studied in Shanghai, and he sat in the 92. And the 92 was better than the dorm, because the dorm was probably 102. And I don't know how they did it. And it wasn't that long ago. What are we talking? The 40s? And it's long ago, but it's not that long ago. You know what I mean? So it's just a big change. But when I'm bringing up Rabbi Kronglass, he was a great man. He, like all the mirror Shanghai people, got married much, much later. That's the way it was. So when they came over there, there may have been a minority that found a wife over there, but there weren't that much. Rabbi Kronglass was known. He was the mashgiach of Bnei Yisrael. He gave a class director. Guys were amazed how he could pull a guy over and bawl him out for not coming on time to davening. And let me scare you. My Rebbe's told me, okay, Rabbi Sheftel Neuberger, Rabbi Chaim Preshlita, they told me, they remember when they were Bacharim, that he could call you over and tell you exactly what time you came to Minyan for the past 2 weeks. Any Bachar. No notes. Not bad. Bruce, I think you should find out how to do this. But he could, at one moment, he could be bawling out a guy, and then another guy could come over, oh, you're engaged, Mazel Tov! And then the guys were amazing. He could switch so quickly. And then, call the other guy, get back over here. Not everybody can do it. It's not so easy. That's so easy. But the Mamloi is just saying that was a quality that David and Malach, that he had to be able to do, to turn off when to be fierce and when to use the more pleasant part of his personality. But there was another facet with him, and this is really has a lot to do with things aren't what they seem. It says over there that he had pretty eyes and he was tov roi. He was good to look at. So this has to do with his relationship with the Sanhedrin court system. Now, this is very, very important because we're going to need this later on when David HaMelech does some things that seem to be a violation of the law or the stretch of the law. In some ways, this is going to make those incidents harder to understand, in some ways easier to understand, but take it and save it. And like Brian was pointing out, we got to try to collect absolutely everything we can, then try to make a decision. But we'll never know until we meet him. But you can try to get as close as you think you can. He says like this: in general, Yefei Einayim, Bruce said esoteric. I usually try to stay away from esoteric, but the Mamlayas goes back and forth. He says in Judaism, Einayim, the eyes of the people, is the Sanhedrin, our big court. And he says, most of the time, David HaMelech tried to do things according to the Sanhedrin. Now, when Shmuel Hanavi met him, that may have not been his first impression. This is David who's going to go soon afterwards and beat Goliath and wrestle with a lion, and he's been running around with the sheep and all that. But the Mamlayas wants us to know that throughout the Torah, very often, when we mention something about eyes, that very often means the person has a strong connection with checking with Sanhedrin as much as possible. So we got to keep that in mind for the times when it looks like David HaMelech didn't talk to them, because we do know at least once or twice that it would have been a much better idea if he would have checked with them, and he checked with them about a lot of other things, and that time he didn't check. Also, the Mayim Lo'ez remind us, now by the way, in general, when we say Mayim Lo'ez, the one that started Mayim Lo'ez was Rabbi Yaakov Kuli. But he lived just so long, and later on, Now, let's see. Later on, his students took over the Mamloes, known in English as the Torah Anthology. It's available in English, translated by Rabbi R.A. Kaplan, and they tell me the English version has more than the Hebrew, even though the Hebrew was done by this great man, Rabbi Shmuel Yerushalmi. But what we're sharing today, the original editor was Rabbi Yaakov Kuli, finished by his students, Rabbi Yitzchak Magrisso, Rabbi Yitzchak Arguiti, Rabbi Rachem Mitriani, Rabbi Fol Chaim Fonchimoli. Isn't that great? All these Italian rabbi names? See? And we think Jewish names are Horowitz, Bowman, Friedman. These are Jewish names. It sounds like a pasta company. But, Jewish people, we've been around. But another thing he says over here, when Tov Roi, good of appearance, isn't always just about what he looks like. The Hamelech says very often the expression of good of appearance, good of eye, usually indicates a generous person that likes to give blessings. So again and again with David, so when you first see him, you see this handsome, tough guy. Now, there's a lot of different actors I could compare it to, but out of respect to David and Melech, that much I know not to do. All right, so I'm not even going to mention. Everybody's probably conjuring in their mind. Oh, I bet he looked like this. The reason I want to tell you, I used to do that. I used to draw comparisons because that's normal, right? You think about the movies and books you read. You read about a great famous man and woman. Right away, you have an imagery in your head. Oh, they look like this, look like that. One time. I'll be honest with you. At Chata'ai and Imazkir Hayom, my sins I mentioned today. When I was 20 years old, I made a funny comedy tape in Yeshivas near Israel. And I had a line in there, Moses is so great, he's even greater than the Fonz. Now we have to go back a little bit. Used to be a show, Happy Days, and one of the co-stars was Arthur Fonzarelli, Henry Winkler, who is Jewish. He is Jewish. And if you remember back in the 70s, what could be a greater compliment for Moses than saying Moses is greater than the Fonz? Do you know what he did? He a really nice, I mean, he's up there in years already. NCSY got Arthur Fonz, what's his real name? Henry Winkler. I shall him be well. They got permission from him. NCSY put out a button. He's going like this. I don't know if it's yarmulke or not yarmulke. I don't know if they superimpose it. He's going like this, and NCSY had on it, be cool, go to shul. You need a box of those, Bruce. You'll give them out. Bruce, you need that. We'll put Justin Bieber, oh God in heaven. Anyway, I don't know if that'll chase people away from the shul or bring them through the shul. Maybe we'll put the president. We'll put David Sliam and Obama on there. Be cool, go to shul. And David in the back waving, we got an Arab, please come. That's what we'll do. All right, but whatever it is, Rabbi Heinemann, he shall live me well, found out about it, and he gently pulled me aside. Did Rabbi Heinemann know who the Fonz was? I don't really think so. Rabbi Heinemann, Rabbi Weissman will tell you, was an extremely worldly man, but worldly for a rabbi does not mean he has to know all the personalities on TV, but he does need to know technology, which he does very well. Rabbi Heinemann gently spoke to me privately. He said, Tzvi, don't do that. He didn't give me a whole lecture. He just took me aside and said, Tzvi, I don't know what you were thinking, just don't do that. So ever since then, I try really hard not to do that. But whatever it was, when you met David Hamelech, you may not have expected him to be this person that could turn it off and turn it on, that would be someone that would consult with Sanhedrin most of the time, and could be a very giving and generous person, but that's his story. Now, King David, now this you don't always hear about. Most people are used to hearing about him going on to be strong, to be a mighty warrior, a great tactical warrior, pretty good leader most of the time. Had some family issues there, especially with some of his kids. But great at writing beautiful songs to Tehillim. There's nothing that we reach out to Hashem more than Tehillim, because he wrote most of it. But there's another side. David Hamelech was a very, very smart person. I'll call him a smart cookie because I can't compare him to any movie star. Very, very, very smart fellow. Very, very great in learning. And the Mailoyas quotes, when it says Tov Roi, good of appearance, good of sight, that means when he would sit with us on Sanhedrin, he did the follows. Now this opens a Pandora's box. Now Pandora might be pagan, right, Bruce? So we'll call it an amigo box. Can't go wrong with that, right? Or a dory box. So anyway, so he says there were times when King David sat on Sanhedrin later in life. I said King David and you walked in. You were waiting for me to do that, weren't you? Anyway, so he says there were times David and Melech would sit with Sanhedrin. They'd be getting ready to make a guilty decision, especially a capital punishment decision. And sometimes David and Melech would tell us Sanhedrin, could we talk? Could we talk? Because it says sometimes David and Melech would have this sense. He says, I know the evidence and this and that, but somehow David and Melech would have a sense, I know according to the letter of the law, we really need to execute this person, this man or woman, but he said, somehow I have this sense, you may want to quote Ruach HaKodesh, that there's some good going to come out of this person some way, and I know according to the letter of the law, we're really supposed to be executing the person, but I don't know, somehow it just seems that there's some kind of good that's destined to come out of this person. Maybe we just shouldn't kill him. Now this is very hard to deal with because this is not in the books. And it's not, seance, voodoo, crystal ball, but the Mamleya says there were times where there were people who were about to get executed and David would convince Sanhedrin, I know what the law says, but somehow it seems that this person, I don't know, there's something about him. Someone or something is supposed to come out of him. Maybe we better delay this a little bit and see what happens. So it could be like that sometimes. So just store all this up, that most of the time he's a person who's going to want to have a respect for Sanhedrin, consulting with them, which amplifies, and commentaries before Shem are going to ask that. When David makes his mistakes, they are going to ask, David, you're always checking. You're always checking with other authorities. Why didn't you check that time? There was a fellow in David's life later who turned out to be a creep named Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth, I don't know if the word Gadol Ador is the right word to use, but Mephibosheth was from the most brilliant Jewish minds of King David's time. He was better in learning and Torah than King David was, but sometimes he could be on the nasty, overbearing side. And the Gemara speaks about how David and Melech would say, you know what? It's not always easy for me, but sometimes before I make a decision, I check with my teacher Mephibosheth. And it was not easy for David, because Mephibosheth could be condescending. And if you look at Navi, he did have a bad end. But he was not your average kind of loving rabbinical teacher, but David and Melech kept consulting with him, even though sometimes it pained. David got a consolation prize. He had two extremely brilliant sons, Solomon and another one named Kilav. Kilav didn't have such a good agent. He's not as well known. But when Shlomo and Kilav were born, and they were extremely, extremely brilliant, somehow that balanced some of the condescendingness, I know there's no such word, that David had to endure from Mephibosheth, because he went up with these brilliant sons who could outdo Mephibosheth, so somehow that was a little bit of a consolation prize. But he's just mentioning over here that there were times where David and Melech could have so much mercy, he would discuss with Sanhedrin, sometimes staying in execution. Okay, now, big question. So you may have had I just want to just close up with this. You may have had a long discussion with somebody in your life. Nature versus nurture. Now looking around the room, the one who has had that discussion the most would be that man. Because when the Cohens with the new child, when he goes shopping with Helen, there's always the issue, is that a boy thing? Is that a girl thing? The boy's color, girl's color, should I buy my son a doll, should I buy this, It used to be clear cut back in the day, boys are this, And girls are that. Boys play with trucks, girls play with it used to be more but for you, David, it's much more complicated. And then people start saying, well, if I buy this for the kid, maybe it'll affect them. And other people say, no, what are you talking about? A boy, you could have a boy wear purple and pink, it won't affect him. And it's all nature. And I don't know, maybe Brian had some of this also, but my kids, it was earlier. But people love to fight about this, nature versus nurture. So you have a question with a lot of our great people, how much of it is inborn, how much is it learned, how much is external forces with any great person, and it's pretty hard to know. I'll just throw two quick things at you. Does anybody remember the cartoon show He-Man? Yeah. They had superpowers. He-Man was popular with my 33-year-old son. Now, there was a big debate. Should you let your kids watch He-Man, have He-Man toys, okay? It was the same time as Thundercats. Bruce, this is after DC Comics. You don't know what this is, Bruce. So anyway, parents would always argue, especially Jewish parents. Oh, God, what should I do? Is it going to affect my kid? So most kids that we knew played with the He-Man toys and they watched the show. And they never hurt anybody. They never did. And they watched every episode, and they never did anything. My generation watched Superman and Popeye. I never punched anybody in the nose, at least over a girl, I didn't. And we never did that. My wife had one kid in the class, a Koyin, named Freddie. He watched every episode. Kid was in kindergarten. One day, my wife walks in kindergarten. It's supposed to be nice and soft, right? Milk and cookies. This kid, a Koyin, stands on the kindergarten table, picks up a block, and he says, Castle Grayskull, I have the power! The kid jumps off the table, growls, and looks at the other kids. So my wife had to do something about it. He was the only kid that we saw that was affected by this, So you just never know, what's going to be. On the other hand, when I went to Yeshiva, so here you have Near Israel, Yeshiva Lane, all Jews, maybe one TV set, right? So according to studies, these should be the most gentle, loving children, right? A bunch of little purple Barneys with yarmulke and bays. Do you know some of the Rebbe's kids were some of the most violent children you ever saw in your life? No comics, no TV, no video games. And we would walk down there sometimes on Shabbos. These kids would come bouncing, yelling, and screaming, and kick you in the shin and push you. Where did it come from? Are they inborn like that? Not all of them. Some of them grew up to be pretty good rabbis, very calm. I don't know where it was. But I'm just saying, you always have this ongoing issue of, what makes a person? What's inborn? What's God-given? What's external? Is it something that you took a course in? So one big thing that we're going to have to talk about a lot in the future is Pasuk Gimel. I just read you the Pasuk. Vayikach Shmuel as Keren Hashemen. Shmuel takes the horn of oil. Vayimshach oso b'kerev echav. He anoints David within his brothers. Vatitzlach ruach Hashem al David. And the spirit of Hashem was successful, Hatzlacha, to David, Mehayom Uvamala, from that day and on. Vayakam Shmuel arose, Vayelach Ramata, he went back to Ramah, which was his base. So at some level, the pouring the oil on his head did something for him. And the Radak and the Ralbag. Now here's the shock. I'm going to leave you with this because we'll all be confused together. When you learn the Torah, the Ralbag is from the biggest rationalist that there are. The Ralbag. Is the Radak tied with him in second place? I don't know how to rate him. But I want to tell you something. The Ralbag and the Radak, early sources, they are more to the rationalist side, especially the Ralbag. Let me tell you what a rationalist the Ralbag is. There are times where the Talmud says it happened like this, and the Ralbag will say, I'm aware the Talmud says this and that, but I think maybe it happened like this. So he's big-time rationalist. So all I could tell, and the Radak isn't too far behind there, by David Kimchi. But all I could tell you is on this pasuk of the oil somehow doing something, making a change in him, they're both with the program. And it's a surprise. Okay, because that's not usually the way that they are, so we'll have to share that in the future. But we're not going to speak like magic, any magic hocus pocus, because generally that's not too Jewish. But they're both going to somehow explain that the anointing oil with the certain recipe that only Stephen Leibowitz has somehow interacted with David's neshama and his gorgeous red hair and whatever else, and somehow it made him a different kind of a person. But we'll have to explore that. And also we have to say, are you sure it wasn't a self-fulfilled prophecy? So stay tuned. Thanks for hanging out with me. Good being here after not being here for a long time.